Let us start once again. The story of this anime begins during a common morning in a mining region. A place where the constant sound of tools and the effort of the workers are part of the daily routine. Some miners were digging inside a deep mine, focused on their work and following the usual rhythm, without imagining that something out of the ordinary was about to happen. Suddenly, without any warning, a strong tremor hits the place. The ground begins to shake violently, the structures creak, and small stones start to fall from the ceiling. What was once a stable environment quickly turns into a scene of danger. It becomes clear to everyone that staying there any longer may cost them their lives. Faced with that, the miners fall into despair and run toward the exit, trying to escape as fast as possible before everything collapses. In the middle of this chaos, while most try to flee, a woman makes a completely different decision. Instead of running outside, she moves toward the danger. Outside the mine, the situation is no less chaotic. Rocks and debris begin to fall everywhere, raising dust and making visibility even worse. Screams echo, and despair takes over the workers who manage to get out. Among them, a man ends up trapped under some wooden beams that collapsed. Stuck and unable to move, he panics. In the middle of the confusion, he ends up dropping a bag full of money that he was carrying with him. Another worker notices that immediately. Driven by greed, he approaches with the intention of taking advantage of the situation and stealing the bag. However, the trapped man still manages to react. Even injured, he stretches his arm and grabs the thief, preventing him from taking the money. Irritated for being stopped, the man loses his patience. Without thinking twice, he picks up a pickaxe and decides to end the man's life right there, taking advantage of his vulnerability. Before he can do anything, the woman appears. She emerges at the exact moment and intervenes without hesitation. Using a mysterious power, she releases intense flames that completely incinerate the aggressor in an instant. The attack is fast, precise, and devastating. The man who was trapped, even having been saved, does not react with gratitude. On the contrary, upon realizing what just happened, he panics. His eyes fill with fear, and he begins to scream, calling the woman a witch. Instead of thanking her for having his life spared, he responds with terror, as if he had witnessed something even more frightening than death itself. The scene quickly changes. Now, we see this same woman being taken to execution. In the village square, the residents gather in large numbers to watch the outcome. The atmosphere is tense, but also filled with expectation. Some people shout, others insult, and there are even those who throw stones, demanding her immediate death. Among those present, some nobles observe everything carefully. One of them questions where the prince is, since it is up to him to make the final decision about the fate of the accused. The execution cannot proceed without his order. A soldier named Carter, who serves directly under the prince, hears the comment, but does not show much reaction. His expression remains firm, as if he were used to this type of situation. Soon after, the scene shifts to the interior of a residence. There, we meet Boris, a loyal servant of the prince, known for his seriousness and dedication. He encounters Tur, another servant, who had just left the young noble's room. Boris asks about the situation, wanting to know if the prince is already awake. Tur replies that he is still sleeping. Even so, Boris decides to enter the room. Upon opening the door, he comes across a scene that clearly suggests what happened there previously, indicating that the prince spent the night in not very discreet activities. Without wasting time, Boris approaches to wake him up. The prince wakes up confused. He looks around, clearly disoriented, not understanding where he is or what is happening. His expression shows strangeness, as if that environment were not familiar to him. Boris then explains the situation. He says that the prince needs to attend the execution of a witch, as the entire city awaits his decision. To the young man, that sounds absurd, almost as if he were trapped in a strange and incoherent dream, trying to organize his thoughts. He asks a simple question. He asks if the servant's name is Boris. The man confirms, noticing the old man's attentive and suspicious look. The prince decides to act cautiously. He understands that any strange behavior may raise suspicion, so he chooses to observe more before acting. When they are about to leave the room, something catches his attention. On the floor, there is a fallen cup. For some reason, that small detail holds his gaze. He watches it for a moment, as if it had some greater meaning, but decides not to comment on it at that moment. Meanwhile, in the central square, the population continues to wait anxiously. Time passes, and the expectation only increases. Finally, the doors open. The prince appears, accompanied by Boris. His presence immediately draws everyone's attention. One of the nobles shows contempt upon seeing him, making it clear that he does not have a good impression of him. On the other hand, the people react with applause, perhaps more out of obligation than genuine admiration. Among the crowd, Tur watches everything carefully. The protagonist looks at the woman accused of witchcraft. As he faces her, he cannot help but think that the whole situation is absurd. Something inside him rejects the idea of simply executing someone in that way. Then, he makes an unexpected decision. He pretends to be sleepy. With that, he postpones the execution and decides to leave the judgment for later, claiming that he is not in a condition to decide at that moment. His attitude surprises everyone. Carter and Boris try to argue. They warn that, if she remains alive, other witches may appear and cause even more problems. However, for the prince, that possibility does not seem to be something negative. On the contrary, he even considers that it could make it easier to resolve everything at once. Without giving many explanations, he simply withdraws. The decision leaves everyone confused. The scene changes once again. Now, we see the prince inside a carriage, returning to his residence. During the journey, he observes the people on the streets, noticing something curious. Many of them look at him with indifference. There is no genuine respect in their eyes. Upon arriving, he locks himself in his room. Finally alone, he is able to breathe more calmly and organize his thought. After reflecting on everything that happened, he reaches an inevitable conclusion. He is in a completely different world. In addition, he is living in the body of a prince of a not very relevant territory, inserted in a backward society full of prejudice. While observing the room more carefully, he finds a board with several names written on it. One of them catches his attention. When he looks at himself in the mirror, everything falls into place. He understands what happened. He has reincarnated. From that moment on, he accepts that he needs to adapt to the new reality and assume the role of Roland Wimbledon. Soon after, we see Roland sitting, eating the meal that was served to him. He seems calmer now, already beginning to adjust to the situation. Boris appears and asks if he was called. Roland confirms and asks him to sit down. During the conversation, Boris informs that they found traces of a witch in the forest to the west of the territory. At the location, they found a peculiar coin, which he shows to the prince. He explains that that object is a symbol of the witches' brotherhood. Curious, Roland asks for more details. Boris then explains that this organization gathers witches with the goal of reaching a supposed sacred mountain. According to rumors, that place would allow one to reach a kind of eternal peace. This promise is used to convince young women to become witches. In addition, he mentions the disappearance of newborns, suggesting that these events may be linked to this mysterious group. Roland then asks if there is a risk of them trying to rescue the prisoner. Boris states that yes, he believes that they would not leave a companion behind. Interested, the protagonist asks about the woman's powers and how she was captured. Boris recounts the incident at the mine, explaining that she used flames to kill a man. For that reason, he believes that the best course would be to execute her as soon as possible. Roland ignores the suggestion. Instead, he decides that he wants to see her personally. Boris tries to dissuade him, warning about the risks. But the prince changes the subject and asks another question. He wants to know why they chose the gallows instead of the stake. Boris replies that it is probably because she does not fear fire. Shortly after, Roland goes down to the dungeon, accompanied by Carter. During the way, Carter still tries to make him reconsider, but without success. Upon arriving at the cell, a guard opens the door. The environment is dark and heavy. Carter positions himself in front, clearly apprehensive. At that moment, the witch raises her head. Then, she stands up. Immediately, Carter prepares his sword, ready to react to any suspicious movement. Roland, however, remains calm. He stops him from acting and moves forward. Taking a few steps ahead, he decides to approach the woman personally. Without formalities, he asks her name, without even introducing himself as the ruler of the territory. The young woman replies that her name is Anna. Then, looking directly at her, Roland decides to get straight to the point and asks what really happened that day in the mine. Anna then begins to explain what truly happened. She says that her father worked as a miner in that same mine. On the day of the collapse, he was trapped under a large rock that crushed his leg, unable to move. Beside him, there was another worker who saw in that situation an opportunity to steal all the money he had saved during his life, even injured. Her father fought with all his strength to prevent the robbery. When he finally managed to face the man, he realized that he was already raising the pickaxe, ready to kill him, with no other option. Anna states that she had to act and ended up taking that miner's life. After hearing everything carefully, Roland asks another question. How was she captured after that? The answer comes with hesitation. Anna says, with a trembling voice, that she was accused unjustly. Roland insists on knowing who did that, but she does not answer. At that moment, Boris approaches and reveals the truth. It was her own father who reported her. The information leaves Roland surprised. But Boris explains that he probably did it because of the reward offered for reporting a witch, which was 25 gold coins for someone with a destroyed leg that represented a chance of survival. Ignoring that detail for a moment, Roland returns to the main point. He wants to understand how Anna managed to defeat the other miner, especially since he was an adult. Anna then admits that she used a special power, something that people call magic. Upon hearing that, Carter and the guards immediately become alert. Even so, Roland does not show fear. On the contrary, he asks her to show that power. Carter and Boris try to stop him, reminding him that the necklace she is wearing, made of divine punishment stone, is suppressing her abilities. If that is removed, the consequences may be dangerous. Even Anna warns that his curiosity may put him at risk. Roland, however, ignores the warnings. He states that if she were truly a malicious threat, he himself would take action. However, he wants to see with his own eyes before deciding. Without patience to wait, he approaches and directly asks her to demonstrate her power. He says that this way he will be able to judge whether she is someone who deserves compassion or if she is merely pretending to be harmless. As he says that, he extends his hand toward the necklace. Carter tries to stop him, but during the movement the necklace ends up breaking, completely releasing Anna's power. At that same instant, Carter tries to pull Roland to a safe place, but he refuses to leave. Instead, he carefully observes the flames that appear. He notices something important. The fire does not spread in an uncontrolled way. Anna is keeping it under control. They remain for a few seconds watching the intense heat melt the nearby iron. Roland does not look away at any moment. When the flames finally cease, Anna asks if he will execute her now that he has seen what she is capable of. Roland does not respond immediately. He simply approaches and covers Anna with his own cloak. Then he makes it clear that he does not intend to kill her. On the contrary, he decides to hire her. From prisoner, she now has a role within the territory. An unexpected change. The scene changes once again, showing Roland in his room, writing down everything he knows about the laws of thermodynamics on a piece of paper. After analyzing the situation, he concludes that Anna's power can be extremely useful for his plans. At that moment, Boris knocks on the door. Roland allows him to enter and asks about the task he had requested. Boris confirms that he has already arranged the false execution of the sentence, ensuring that no one suspects what really happened. Satisfied, Roland gives new instructions. He asks for a complete report on everything that happened in the border city in the last decade, including trade, taxes, expenses, and also information about local workshops, such as weaving, pottery, and other productions. Boris is surprised by the request and questions the reason for so much interest. He even suggests that perhaps the prince is thinking about competing for the throne with his brothers. Roland becomes thoughtful upon hearing that and looks at the map on the wall. On it, each of his brothers governs an important part of the kingdom. One controls the military fortress, another the commercial port, another the economic center, and so on. He realizes that, compared to them, his position is disadvantageous. When asking Boris for his opinion, the old man confirms that his chances are low, considering the limited resources and his reputation among the nobles. Even so, Roland agrees only in part. He states that he intends to attract the king's attention in another way. Before ending the subject, He asks who truly governs the country. Boris replies that it is the royal family of Graycastle. Roland disagrees, saying that this is only an appearance, because the true power is in the hands of the church, located in the holy city of Hermes. With that, he reveals his objective: to create a territory that does not depend on the church, and more than that, to conquer the throne. He asks Boris if that bothers him, since the church has great influence. Boris admits that it does, but reminds him that the population supports that institution. Roland responds that this support exists only because people believe in lies, and he intends to prove that. The first of these lies, according to him, is the idea that witches are beings that are malicious by nature. Boris then realizes that that is why Roland saved Anna. The prince confirms and even makes a promise: if he manages to win the dispute for the throne, Boris will stop being just a servant and will become his right-hand man. In return, he asks for total loyalty, without questioning his decisions. After the conversation, Boris leaves the room and meets Carter in the corridor. The soldier asks what was discussed, but Boris avoids giving details, only commenting that the prince seems different. The scene changes once more, showing Anna sitting in the garden, thoughtful. After demonstrating her powers, she received basic explanations about her new role, but she still does not fully understand what she is supposed to do. At that moment, Roland appears and approaches naturally. He greets her, and Anna, still confused, asks why he is doing all that for her. Roland simply smiles and invites her to walk. During the walk, Anna questions whether he really thinks it is right to forgive her, since she took someone's life. Roland responds that she acted to protect her father, something that anyone would do in that situation. Even so, she insists, reminding him that she is still a witch. Without answering directly, Roland picks a nearby flower and hands it to her. When Anna holds the object, he states that the plant is poisonous. Frightened, she immediately drops it. Then Roland reveals that it was a lie. He explains that just those words were enough to cause fear. Then, he asks if that is not exactly what happens with witches. Anna understands the point, and Roland confirms. Fear is born more from what people believe, not necessarily from the truth. Roland continues explaining, making it clear that that power is not something malicious, but rather a natural phenomenon, part of the world itself. Even so, Anna cannot accept that easily. Emotions take over her, and she begins to cry. She says that he does not understand how dangerous that power can be, capable of destroying everything around without control. Because of that, she believes that it would be best for her to be executed, avoiding causing more problems. Roland loses his patience upon hearing that. He responds that, if she truly wishes to die, no one can stop her. But that would solve absolutely nothing. People would continue believing that all witches are the same. Instead, he presents another option, a different path, where it would be possible to build a world in which witches could live in peace, without fear of persecution. Then he asks if she would not like to have that chance. With tears in her eyes, Anna admits that she would. She says that she would like to have a normal life, teaching children to read and write, just like her former teacher, Master Carl. Upon hearing that, Roland states that that future can become reality, as long as she decides to join him. Working together, that would stop being just a dream. Faced with that proposal, Anna accepts and asks what she must do. A short time later, Roland takes her to a workshop, where she begins to train and learn to better control her power. In the following days, Anna dedicates herself completely to the task, showing constant effort. Meanwhile, Roland remains in his room, analyzing documents and reviewing reports. On a certain night, the maid who had appeared earlier, sends a message by means of a carrier pigeon. On the next morning, Roland meets with Boris and comments that he has already analyzed the records of the territory. He realizes that the main activity of the border city is mining, but something does not make sense. Despite that, there is almost no income. All trade seems to be concentrated in the hands of a group linked to Longsong. Confused, Roland asks where the population's food comes from. Boris explains that, until then, all the extracted ore was exchanged for grain coming from the fortress of Longsong. For them, the border city was nothing more than an extension of their properties, so they provided only enough to keep the workers alive and productive. In other words, they completely exploited the region. Even before that, the former local ruler already followed this same model, handing over resources in exchange for little food. This enrages Roland. He considers it absurd to maintain that system, especially knowing that only a few were profiting from it. Boris also reveals that he and other nobles had interests in the fortress, which explained the lack of concern for the city's development. For Roland, it becomes clear that this needs to change immediately. He then orders the end of that exchange system. From now on, he intends to start real trade, to sell the ore directly to the city of Willowtown and use the profit to buy food. Boris raises the possibility that they might refuse the deal. Roland already has a solution: to sell at half the market price at the beginning, ensuring capital and gradually gaining ground. When questioned about how to sustain that strategy, Roland explains that, in the future, they will be able to sell to other regions. The city is located near the Redwater River, an important route that crosses the country. With a good fleet, it will be possible to expand trade and grow economically. Boris acknowledges that the plan is smart, but warns that Longsong may react, accusing them of harming its interests. In addition, he reminds him of an even greater problem: the so-called demonic months. Every year, after spring, this period brings corrupted creatures from the Dragonspine Mountains. Forest animals turn into aggressive beasts that advance, destroying everything. Since the border city has no walls, its inhabitants are forced to take refuge in the fortress of Longsong during the winter. Roland understands that, if he does not solve this problem, there will be no progress, much less any chance of competing for the throne. Without wasting time, he summons Carter and gathers 3 survivors of that period, 2 responsible for lighting warning signals and an experienced hunter. He begins by asking about the signaling system. After some difficulty, one of the men explains that they patrol the mountains and light bonfires when they detect the beasts, then travel by boat to the fortress. That detail catches Roland's attention, and he asks whether the creatures attack in the water. The answer is no. Next, he asks how long the demonic months last. The answer is between 2 and 3 months, sometimes reaching 4 in extreme cases. During those longer periods, many people end up dying due to lack of food. This intrigues Roland, since theoretically they would be protected in the fortress. The soldier then reveals the truth. The food provided depended on the amount of ore delivered. Even with rationing, it was often not enough, and in the end some were simply left to starve. Outraged by that situation, Roland continues the investigation and asks the hunter about the creatures they faced. The man describes beasts similar to boars and wolves, but also mentions more dangerous versions: hybrids with strength comparable to lions, wings like eagles, and extremely sharp senses. Fortunately, they are rare, appearing in small numbers during each demonic period. After hearing everything, Roland asks the hunter's name, who introduces himself as Iron Axe. Impressed, the prince praises him for his courage and rewards the 3 men with silver coins. After that, he decides to personally inspect the area where the signals are lit. Upon arriving at the location with Carter, he carefully observes the terrain and asks the distance to the river. Carter estimates about 2,000 feet. Curious, he asks the reason for that inspection. Roland then reveals his plan. He intends to remain in the city during the winter and protect the population. Carter is surprised and asks how he plans to do that. Roland responds with confidence. He will build the greatest wall that place has ever seen, capable of preventing the invasion of the beasts. And with that, he makes it clear that he does not intend to flee as others did before, but to face the problem head-on and change the fate of that city. Now the attention shifts to Barop. While he remains alone in his office, immersed in his own thoughts, the older man cannot get the protagonist out of his head and the impressive transformation he has recently undergone. Until not long ago, Poco was nothing more than a simple drunk, someone who lived without great ambitions or responsibilities, going through life in a carefree way and neglecting practically everything around him. Work, for example, was something he completely ignored, without showing the slightest interest in fulfilling his obligations. Barop himself admits, in silence, that he even came to regret having accepted that position at his side. However, his view began to change after the recent events. From the moment Poco saved the witch, it became evident that there was something far beyond what he appeared to be. He demonstrated possessing an extremely strategic mind, capable of analyzing complex situations quickly and making bold decisions, even going so far as to directly challenge religious power, something that few would dare to do. Intrigued by all of this, Barop begins to reflect on what may still happen from that point forward, especially regarding the protagonist's next steps. The construction of the wall emerges as a central point in his thoughts, being something essential to ensure that all the effort carried out so far is not in vain. Even so, no matter how much he tries to rationalize it, he cannot avoid asking himself how that will possibly be brought into reality. The scene then shifts to Carter, who had received the important responsibility of supervising the progress of the works. Faithfully following the orders of Roland, the group was sent to the mine located to the north of the region, where they were supposed to extract limestone and carefully mix it with clay, always maintaining a uniform proportion between the materials. After this stage, the compound would be transported to the heating area, where Anna would be responsible for continuing the process. It is at this moment that we can observe more clearly the controlled and precise way in which the witch uses her magic. Each of her movements is calculated, demonstrating not only power, but also an impressive mastery over her abilities. After a few hours of intense and continuous work, Anna finally leaves the place, and Roland enters right after to verify whether everything had been done correctly. Upon confirming that the result was within expectations, he asks Carter to find someone capable of grinding the material and mixing it with gypsum until everything turns into an extremely fine powder. Already during the afternoon period, after much effort, the mixture was finally ready. Carter, still not fully understanding the purpose of that preparation, cannot contain his curiosity and directly asks what Roland intended to do with it. Roland merely gives a slight smile and, turning to Anna, comments that this time he himself would be responsible for showing magic. Confused by the statement, Anna asks if she could also use her powers, to which Roland responds positively, but makes a point of explaining that what they were dealing with was not magic, but rather science. Next, he instructs Carter to mix the powder with water and pour the resulting substance over the stones, ensuring that the liquid fills all the spaces between them in a uniform manner. Carter shows some doubt, questioning whether that would really work as expected, but Roland simply asks him to trust the process and wait until the next day to observe the results. When they return to the location the following morning, Roland asks Carter to test the resistance of the newly applied material. Without hesitation, Carter strikes the stones with a shovel, expecting some sign of fragility. But he is surprised to realize that they were extremely rigid, much more than before. Impressed by the effectiveness of that, he states that with that method, it would be possible to raise a wall around the city in about 5 years, in addition to significantly reinforcing the structure of the castle itself. Roland, however, demonstrates an even greater ambition. He states that he intends to use that material to build several other structures, including houses for the entire population, improving the quality of life for everyone. Then, he assigns Anna the task of producing that mixture daily, while Carter receives the responsibility of completing the wall in just 3 months. Before Roland walks away, Carter interrupts him, curious, to ask what the name of that seemingly miraculous powder would be. After thinking for a few moments, Roland decides to call it cement, a name that, interestingly, sounds strangely familiar. As the days go by, Roland begins to frequently visit the construction site, always closely following the progress of the works. However, he ends up coming across a frustrating situation. The progress was extremely slow, and the little that had been built presented several structural problems. Carter takes responsibility for the mistakes, but Barop intervenes, explaining that that type of construction requires the presence of an experienced architect, someone with sufficient technical knowledge to avoid failures. Faced with that explanation, Roland wastes no time and orders that they find a master mason as quickly as possible. In another scene, we see a man walking calmly through the city, lost in his own memories. As he walks, he recalls moments he lived alongside Anna and other girls, memories that seem to carry a certain emotional weight. Among these recollections, the image appears of one of his students entering his office completely shaken. crying endlessly after discovering that she was also a witch. That situation had left him deeply surprised at the time. His thoughts are interrupted when someone calls out to him from a distance, asking for his help to read an announcement issued by the prince. As he approaches, he discovers that they are recruiting workers for the construction of the wall, specifically including a master mason. A short time later, Roland receives the news that they have already found someone with the necessary skills for the job. To his surprise, it turns out to be a teacher from the local school. Without showing much concern about that detail, Roland asks that he be brought to him immediately. When they finally meet, the man introduces himself as Carl Vand and states that he has previously worked on the maintenance of the dikes of Graycastle, in addition to having participated in palace projects and in carrying out repairs on various public constructions. Upon hearing this information, Barop mentions that the works of Graycastle were the responsibility of the Masons Guild and directly questions whether Carl was part of that organization. Carl confirms, which makes Roland remember an old disaster that occurred during the construction of a theater in the castle, an event that resulted in the execution of all the members of the guild. Carl, however, clarifies that this version of the facts does not completely correspond to reality. According to him, the true person responsible was the administrator of the project, who accepted bribes and ordered the replacement of the type of stone used in the construction, aiming to reduce costs. This decision ended up compromising the structure, leading to the collapse of the building. Even after several warnings made by the Masons about the risks, no one listened to them. After the tragedy, during the investigation, the administrator claimed that he was only trying to save resources and ended up being considered innocent, while the entire guild was unjustly condemned. Carl further reveals that he managed to escape during the night before being captured, and since then he has been living in hiding, concealing his true identity in order to survive. Intrigued, Roland asks why he decided to reveal himself at that moment. Carl replies that he has his own reasons, but that he still cannot share them. After hearing the whole story, Roland asks for Barop's opinion, who suggests sparing him, arguing that they desperately need someone with his skills. Roland agrees with that assessment, grants Carl forgiveness, and hires him as the main person responsible for the project. Without wasting time, Roland presents his construction plan in detail. After carefully analyzing the project, Carl suggests some modifications, such as reducing the height and width of the wall and, in contrast, building a trench around it, which could be completed in approximately a month and a half. Even so, he shows some doubt regarding the possibility of finishing the wall within the stipulated deadline, mainly due to the difficulty of producing a sufficient quantity of carved stones. Roland then asks a direct question: would it be possible to complete the work if there were enough material? Carl, after reflecting for a moment, replies that yes, in that scenario, the construction would be feasible within the established deadline. Next, Roland decides to show his creation. He takes Carl to the place where he carried out the experiments, allowing him to see up close the resistance of the cement. Impressed with the material, Carl confidently states that with that, it would be possible to finish everything in just a few months. Satisfied, Roland leaves the rest in his hands. Soon after, Carl asks to speak about the reason that brought him there, but he is interrupted by the arrival of Anna. Upon seeing her, he shows enormous relief and reveals that, during all this time, he had been tormented by nightmares. Grateful to the protagonist, he kneels before him. Roland asks him to stand up and makes it clear that he does not see witches as evil beings, stating that he does not intend to participate in any kind of persecution against them. Faced with that, the teacher decides to tell the truth. Another witch has appeared, and it is Nanwa, one of his students. Upon hearing that, no one there could hide their discomfort. A tense atmosphere took over the place, and it was impossible not to feel a certain fear. Barop knew very well that, if that situation had occurred anywhere else, the result would probably be a cruel witch hunt. Even so, in the case of the prince, the doubt was different. What would Roland do in the face of that? To everyone's surprise, he merely gives a slight smile and calmly approaches, asking that they bring Nanwa to him as well. Trying to clarify the situation, Roland comments that he only helped Anna because he needed her abilities. Once again, Carl misinterprets that and states that, in the future, Nanwa may also be useful to please him. Upon hearing that kind of comment, Barop shows some regret, but Roland decides to move forward without arguing. Meanwhile, Anna continues to be responsible for the production of the cement, and Carl still cannot hide how impressed he is with that material. Because of that, the protagonist reinforces that he wants to see Nanwa up close. When Barop steps away, he realizes that dealing with a young girl will not be something simple, especially because of her family. Roland then decides to accompany him to the school. On the following day, already in the kitchen, Nanwa appears shy and clearly distrustful of everything around her. However, the situation changes completely when Anna appears and embraces her warmly, creating a more welcoming environment and helping the girl relax. During the meal, Roland asks how Nanwa discovered her powers. She explains that everything happened when she tried to help an injured bird, and, unexpectedly, a strange energy appeared and completely healed the animal. Interested, Roland asks that other injured animals be brought to better test that ability. Nanwa manages to heal them without difficulty, showing that she is capable of repairing physical damage, although she cannot regenerate lost limbs nor bring someone back to life. With that, Roland decides that she should continue practicing, but without her family finding out, avoiding any problems. Gradually, Carter begins to understand the reason behind Roland's interest in witches. Even with the threat of the demonic moon approaching, Roland confidently states that they will survive, although he knows that there are still greater dangers ahead. In another scene, during the night, a silver-haired woman silently observes the light of the moon. At that moment, a man enters the chamber and addresses her with respect, calling her Your Highness, and informs her that the Black Fleet has returned with a large amount of resources after intercepting a convoy that was traveling from Garcia to Wolfhart. Upon hearing this, the woman asks for the name of the captain of the Black Fleet, and the man replies that his name is Drake. Without showing much reaction, she turns around and orders that he be granted the title of Lord, in addition to authorizing that all the plunder remain with the fleet. The man thanks her on behalf of everyone and then changes the subject, revealing that the mission has failed. According to him, Prince Roland did end up ingesting the poison, but he fell asleep and, shortly afterward, woke up normally, as if nothing had happened. Clearly irritated with the situation, the woman shows impatience and orders that the person responsible be given one more chance. In addition, she demands that they use her sister's belongings as a form of pressure. Before dismissing the man, she also orders the execution of the alchemist who created the poison. Back in the protagonist's territory, a man arrives at the port and observes the movement of people working both in the area and in the castle. At that moment, Roland is analyzing some reports alongside Barop. He informs him that the construction of the wall will be completed soon. Roland then asks about the financial situation of the territory. Barop replies that, at the moment, everything is relatively stable and that the food supplies coming from Sauce have already arrived. He even points out the numbers recorded in the report, stating that they will be enough to get through the winter. Despite that, Barop also explains that, even after covering all the expenses, there is still a small amount left over. However, he makes it clear that the problem lies in the fact that expenses continue to be higher than revenues. In other words, although the current situation is not critical, in the long term, it may become a major problem. In summary, they have enough food and even a bit of money saved, but they are still on a path that may lead them back into difficulties. He further adds that a large portion of the expenses still depends on the treasury, which means that, if they maintain that pace, the resources should last only until spring. Roland tries to reassure him, reminding him that they still rely on the mineral trade and that, if they manage to complete the wall and stabilize the region, production will be guaranteed. However, Barop points out another concern. They have interrupted the supply of ore to Longsong, and it is unlikely that Duke Ryan will ignore that situation. At that exact moment, a notice interrupts the conversation. An emissary from Longsong has just arrived. Roland then orders Barop to prepare a banquet using the food from Willow Village, believing that winning someone over with food is always a good start. Shortly afterward, the table is prepared with various dishes and desserts. The emissary, named Herman, is visibly surprised by the quantity and variety of food. Roland invites him to sit down and eat, while watching Roland use chopsticks naturally. Herman cannot hide his curiosity and asks what those objects were, so different from common utensils. Roland then calmly explains that they were simple utensils, similar to small sticks, easy to produce, inexpensive, and, above all, more hygienic than traditional methods. He also comments that he believes the entire border city should adopt that type of utensil in everyday life, aiming to improve the population's habits. Even so, he emphasizes that it was not something common for everyone at that moment, explaining that that particular meal was a welcoming banquet, made possible thanks to the food that had recently arrived from Willow Village. After the meal ends, Herman shows politeness and respect by thanking him for the hospitality offered. Then, he explains the true reason for his visit, stating that he was there representing Longsong and reminding them that the agreed date for the delivery of the ore had already passed. He adds that the food intended for exchange was already prepared for shipment, but that they could not proceed with the delivery without receiving the previously agreed ore. Roland, in turn, responds directly, explaining that a recent accident had completely changed the situation. The mine located to the north had collapsed, interrupting production and making it impossible for them to reach the quantity stipulated in the agreement. Faced with that, Herman tries to propose an alternative, suggesting that at least the equivalent of 2 months of production be delivered as a way to keep the agreement active. However, Roland recalls the difficult times that his region faced in the past, when many people died of hunger due to the scarcity of resources. He states, with conviction, that he will not allow that tragedy to repeat itself. For that reason, he makes a firm decision to cancel the agreement between the fortress and Longsong. The situation becomes even more surprising when Roland reveals that he had already sold the ore to the city of Sauce, where transactions are made using coins, allowing greater commercial flexibility. According to him, this model proves to be more advantageous for his people, ensuring better conditions for survival. Herman shows surprise upon hearing that and comments that Sauce does not even usually trade ore frequently. In addition, he points out that, even with payments in coins, the financial return may not be as high as expected, which could represent a significant loss in the long term. He then begins to explain in more detail about Longsong. It is a region that has been established for more than 100 years, with strong activity in the western area. In terms of development and market size, it easily surpasses the city of Sauce. Therefore, maintaining commercial relations with them could bring much greater benefits in the future, instead of depending exclusively on a single partner. Faced with that, Herman decides to present a new proposal. He suggests that Roland sell 30% of the ore at a value below the market price, creating an agreement that, according to him, could benefit both sides. Roland, upon hearing the proposal, immediately realizes that he is dealing with someone experienced in trade, someone who knows how to conduct negotiations in a strategic manner. Even so, he raises an important concern, questioning whether that agreement would really be enough to guarantee the livelihood of the families in the region. Herman responds honestly, stating that he cannot guarantee that with complete certainty. However, he assures that, as the person responsible for foreign trade, he will do everything possible to convince the involved families to accept the conditions and maintain the flow of resources. After carefully considering the situation, Roland decides to accept the proposal. Before leaving, Herman gives one final warning. He comments that the journey to the city of Sauce may become extremely dangerous in the coming months due to the arrival of winter, recommending that Roland take into account the point of view of Duke Ryan and act with caution. In response, Roland makes it clear that he does not intend to travel either to Sauce or to Longsong. Instead, he reveals his true plan: to erect a great wall around the territory, transforming the border city into the new line of defense of the Kingdom of Graycastle. The statement surprises Herman, who immediately points out the consequences of that decision. He reminds that any choice made by Roland will have a direct impact on all the border cities. If something goes wrong, many people will not even have the chance to escape. Roland, however, simply thanks him for the concern shown. With that, Herman says his farewell and continues on his way, while it becomes evident that the protagonist is taking an enormous risk, since the failure of that plan could bring devastating consequences. After the meeting, Roland comments to Barop that the issue of food was resolved exactly as he had predicted. Meanwhile, Herman returns to his territory and reports everything that happened during the meeting. He explains that the prince is building a wall with the objective of protecting his subjects from the beasts and, at the same time, transforming the border city into a strategic point within the kingdom. It becomes clear, through his words, that Roland has ambitions much greater than simply managing an ordinary city. Upon hearing this report, one of the nobles stands up and openly criticizes Roland, classifying his actions as childish and impulsive. Others join in the criticism, mocking the situation and stating that it is only a matter of time before the prince ends up begging for help. At that moment, the Duke decides to intervene. He calls Boris and asks whether he has any information about the construction of the wall. Boris replies that, a few days earlier, Roland had been recruiting masons and workers, but he believed that it would only be for small repairs, not for a large-scale project. The Duke then turns to Herman, asking whether he had seen the wall personally. At the same time, in another setting, Roland gathers the entire population of the city to make an important announcement. He begins by explaining about the meeting with the emissary from Longsong and reveals that they demanded the immediate delivery of the ore. Roland states that he tried to negotiate, explaining the current situation of production and asking for support to face the winter. But his request was refused. This means that they will not receive food, exactly as happened during the demonic moon 2 years earlier. The news quickly leaves everyone apprehensive, creating an atmosphere of tension among the residents. Roland then adds that the astrologers of Graycastle predicted that the winter will be even harsher this time, possibly lasting for more than 4 months. In other words, if no action is taken, the tragedy of the past may repeat itself, and in an even more severe way. He asks everyone to remember the losses they suffered during that difficult period, reinforcing the seriousness of the situation and the need for unity. Returning to the nobles' meeting, Herman presents his final analysis. He believes that Roland is not building the wall solely for defensive purposes, but also with commercial objectives, trying to force negotiations based on coins. Even so, since he is a prince, he suggests that they avoid any direct conflict with the royal family. Herman explains that if they agree to buy the ore with a 30% discount, it will still be possible to obtain profit. In addition, if the border city manages to defend itself from the beasts successfully, they would save resources and could even make use of the lands between the fortress and the city for cultivation. He also highlights that the dispute for the throne has already been going on for 5 years, and that Roland will hardly remain inactive during that period. This means that, in the future, the border city may become even more prosperous, and its inhabitants would continue under the Duke's rule. In that scenario, he would end up controlling the largest territory in the entire kingdom. Finally, Herman suggests not only buying the ore, but also sending workers to directly help with the construction of the wall, thus ensuring strategic and economic advantages in the long term. Despite that, the other nobles laugh at the proposal, calling it naive. The Duke, in turn, admits that the idea has logic, but states that it reflects only the thinking of a merchant, focused on profits and losses. He then stands up and makes it clear that his vision is different. For him, it makes no sense to negotiate with someone he cannot control. In his opinion, those who disobey must be punished. In addition, he shows no concern for the fate of the border city, as he considers that everything there already belongs to him, including the prince himself. Back in the city, Roland presents to the population the supplies he managed to gather, ensuring that they will be enough to face the winter. The news brings relief and hope, showing that they may not need to relive the suffering of the past. However, that sense of calm does not last long. Roland reveals that, from that moment on, they have become enemies of Longsong, which lowers everyone's morale. Now, there is no other option besides resisting. To increase the chances of survival, he orders the construction of the wall and summons everyone who is able to fight, offering payment and protection for their families. The choice is simple, yet difficult at the same time: face danger to defend their home or risk dying of hunger. Later, alongside Anna and Nanwa, Roland conducts an experiment using a candle, demonstrating the existence of different gases and explaining how curiosity is essential for the advancement of knowledge. Then, he asks for materials for a new experiment. However, when he finally tries to rest, he is surprised by a woman who appears behind him and places a sword against his neck, saying in a firm tone, "Your Highness, do not move." During the night, Roland visits Anna after the encounter with Ruiz, a witch who had infiltrated the village. She reveals that she came to thank him for helping Anna and Nanwa and explains that she intends to take them to the Witches' Association, where they would be safe, especially because Anna is about to face a dangerous ritual that could lead to her death. Roland initially refuses, but eventually agrees. Even so, Anna decides to stay, and Ruiz chooses to remain as well in order to help her. The next day, Roland discovers that Tur has died, possibly connected to a conspiracy against him, something that Ruiz partially confirms. Soon after, he takes part in a meeting about the village's resources. Although they manage to obtain some money, they still face difficulties, especially in forming a military force. Carter suggests seeking support from Baron Boris, and Roland agrees, even without high expectations, recognizing the fragility of his defense. Barov compares the situation to a game of chess about to be lost due to a lack of pieces. Roland, however, counters by saying that it is precisely the pawns, the simplest ones, that can guarantee victory. He states that the people will fight until the end, even without experience, and assures that he will train them properly. In addition, he guarantees that he will not send them into battle unprepared. Next, we see Roland training Anna, teaching her to concentrate her fire magic into a single point. After much effort, she succeeds, and her flames even change color. However, the effort leaves her completely exhausted. Roland congratulates her and states that that power can become a weapon capable of changing the course of the war. Later, in his room, Ruiz appears again. She promises to protect both Anna and Roland. As proof of trust, she shows the scroll that Anna handed to her and says that she intends to take it to the Witches' Association. Roland allows it, demonstrating mutual trust between them. The following day, Roland and Carter visit Baron Boris in search of military support. Despite acknowledging their courage, Boris refuses to help, claiming that his men are exhausted and that he does not intend to risk his forces against demonic beasts. Instead, he offers only financial support. Carter becomes irritated with that attitude, considering it dishonorable. Roland, on the other hand, remains calm and states that he already expected that response. He accepts the money, planning to use it strategically, and concludes that they cannot depend on the nobility. When Carter asks how they will train without support, Roland responds confidently that he has his own methods. The scene then shifts to the militia camp, where we see Brian meeting some friends who came to enlist. They explain that they were attracted by the promise of a safer job, acting as messengers on horseback, avoiding direct combat. During the conversation, the topic of Sherry, the girl from the bar, comes up. Brian states that he does not intend to die, and that, when he returns, he will ask her to marry him. He also reveals that his goal is to earn enough money to build a future with her. At that moment, everyone is interrupted by Roland's arrival at the camp. His presence immediately draws everyone's attention. Yes, our protagonist truly stands out. As he steps onto the stage, Roland thanks everyone who came forward to defend their homes. Officially naming that group the Border Militia, he announces that, for 1 month, everyone will undergo intense training, and that those who stand out will be rewarded. As an initial incentive, he reveals that the grand reward will be an extra egg at breakfast. Despite being simple, that gesture excites everyone present. Next, Roland introduces the captain responsible for the training. It is Iron Axe, known as the best hunter in the region. He also promises that those who demonstrate courage and good performance may be promoted to officers, regardless of their origin. Iron Axe then takes the lead and begins the first exercise. Everyone must maintain a firm posture for half an hour. Whoever succeeds will receive the much-desired extra egg. The recruits become excited. He orders everyone to keep their bodies straight, chests out, abdomens tightened, and posture rigid. Time passes under the strong sun, and the effort begins to take its toll. Many sweat intensely, including the captain himself. When the order to rest is finally given, everyone collapses onto the ground, completely exhausted. No one had imagined that something seemingly simple would be so difficult. Even so, everyone celebrates after all. They will eat an egg, something rare for them. Iron Axe comments to Carter that everyone passed the first stage. Soon after, Roland calls Carter over to talk. The recruits watch nervously, fearing that the reward might be cancelled. Some even show distrust, believing that a noble's word may not mean much. During this, questions arise about the choice of Iron Axe as captain, since he does not belong to the nobility and comes from the desert. However, he is recognized as one of the most skilled hunters, in addition to possessing superior physical strength. Carter returns and announces that everyone must stand up. He informs them that, by Roland's order, everyone will receive the promised egg, thanking them for their effort. Then, he explains the next challenge, to maintain the same posture for an entire hour. If they succeed, they will earn another egg. The recruits become excited, but Carter adds one condition. If even one person fails, everyone will lose the reward. This creates tension among them. One of the recruits asks Brian if he thinks he can do it. He gulps nervously, but responds with determination that he will succeed after all. 2 eggs are at stake. Meanwhile, Carter returns to Roland and expresses his concerns. He doubts that those people will be able to withstand battle and questions the usefulness of that kind of training. He also shows distrust regarding Iron Axe's ability as captain. Roland then asks whether, using traditional methods, it would be possible to turn them into good warriors in just 2 months. Carter replies that it would not, it would take years. Faced with that, Roland explains that he does not intend to turn them into knights, but rather to prepare them to survive and obey orders. He assures that the results will appear quickly. In addition, he states that both Iron Axe and the witches are part of the border people, so he sees no problem in trusting them. He prefers to focus on the plan. Carter then analyzes things more carefully and notices something curious. Roland also wants to teach the recruits how to read and write. Confused, he asks the reason. Roland responds that this is essential for them to understand orders and strategies. An efficient army needs educated individuals, something that history itself has already proven. Later, during lunch, the recruits eat emotionally, some even with tears in their eyes. After that, Carter announces the afternoon training, running 3 laps around the city before sunset. Those who succeed will receive another egg at dinner. The exercise begins, and many quickly reach their limit. Brian is one of those who suffer the most. He falls, tries to get up, feels like vomiting, but keeps fighting against his own body. His only motivation is not to give up. With his vision blurred, he can only think about continuing, until he hears someone calling his name. The scene shifts to the camp. Carter asks Iron Axe if everyone completed the course. At first, 3 recruits are missing, which raises concern, but soon someone announces that they are arriving. Everyone stands and watches from a distance. The 3 appear, exhausted but still standing. Their companions begin to cheer, and Brian smiles, proud that he managed to make it. With that, it is confirmed, everyone completed the challenge. At night, the militia celebrates around a campfire. Carter makes a toast to the success of the training, but soon warns that there is still more to come. Emergency formation training. While some complain about extreme exhaustion, he makes it clear that they must continue. Later, Roland returns to his office. Upon entering, he finds Ruiz already there. She comments that he worked all day and is still busy, and also mentions that she already ate the bacon before it got cold. Roland ignores the remark and jokes about her lack of respect, saying that before she used to be more polite with a prince. Ruiz then stands up and makes a bow, apologizing. She mentions that the meal was prepared for 2. Roland simply smiles, implying that he already knew that. After working the entire night, Roland realizes that Ruiz has already left and decides to test a rifle that he created. He presents the weapon to Carter and Iron Axe, demonstrating its great power, although production is still limited. Even so, he states that he intends to use it to protect the city, which leads both of them to swear loyalty. Meanwhile, Boris, Lord of Longsong, receives information about Roland. He dismisses the formed militia and believes that, in winter, Roland will end up asking for help. Even so, he makes it clear that he does not intend to help him, and that he does not see him as a threat, but also does not intend to give him any chance.